Vico, Flixie, and Chap are the best trio in the world right now, coming second in the first Trio Cash Cup and first in the most recent one. They use many strategies to dominate these lobbies, and in this video we're going to go over 10 strategies they use in the most recent Trio Cash Cup that you can implement into your own games to dominate Trio Cash Cups this season and in Trio FNCS next year. Vico, Flixie, and Chap landed at the Raft for the first 5 games of the tournament and saw some decent success from this drop spot, but they were dying off spawn way too much, so they decided to drop their egos and switch to Freaky Fields for the second half of the tournament. They immediately saw more success here, winning back-to-back games and only dying off spawn one more time. This shows the importance of not overcommitting to the best drop spot on the map if you know you're more comfortable at a more low-key spot. While fighting off spawn, the most important part in trios is getting a player's advantage. They did this by sticking together and looking for sprays onto other teams fighting in their POIs. Once they get a knock or a large amount of damage, they jumped in and play their numerical advantages to quickly clean up the fights. With the new chainsaw being added, teams are finding ways to gain advantages with it. Vico and Flixie used the chainsaw's speed boost to make their off-spawn looting faster so they could rotate out of their drop before anyone else. They then would use the chainsaw to get themselves to the forecast tower quicker in order to beat other teams to it, giving them a huge advantage in the rest of the game. When taking fights in trios, they had 2 strategies depending on how the other teams played in the fight. Regardless of which strategy they used, they always tried to take fights from the aggressor point of view, as it is a lot more reliable to try and apply pressure than to try and find mistakes in your opponent's pressure. Once on the aggressive stance, they would look at how much space the defensive team made. If the defensive team made a lot of space, then they would all pressure from the top. This is because when a defensive trio makes a lot of space, they can take height from a lot more angles. By having all 3 players play from above, all potential height takes are removed, meaning that Vico, Flixie, and Chap can constantly apply pressure until the defensive team collapses. In contrast, if the defensive team makes very little space, they'll have 1 or sometimes 2 players drop on the walls and start applying pressure. This will put more pressure onto the defensive team as they have to defend from multiple angles, making it harder to track where you are. This can result in the moments where one player from the trio will grab a wall or floor and then just leave it open. Then when the players on the defensive team are forced to move from the pressure from the other angles, they end up right in the crosshairs of the other attacking team members. Once they get this first knock, they collapse in on the rest of the fight much faster, knowing that with their aim, they will never lose a 2v1 aim duel. Throughout the mid game, they constantly trying to gain little advantages, and they did this in 4 ways. The first was playing for forecast towers. When they landed at the Raft, they would quickly rotate down to the Peterbot forecast tower, and when landing at Freaky Fields, they would rotate either to the North forecast tower or the Lake forecast tower. They put a huge emphasis on this, going for it and getting it in all 6 games they survived off spawn. The next objective they went for were bunkers. This allowed them to top off their loot and heals and play medkits in the zone for safer rotations. After bunkers, they then would try to play for dashes. This was easy for them when they landed at the Raft, but they still went out of their way to get dashes when the zone pulled in the northwest corner of the map when they landed at the fields. This allowed them to make quicker rotates and also helped them play height, which I'll explain more later on. The final mid-game advantage they played for was the island. Like bunkers, by claiming the island, they could replenish their heals and materials. They always tried to actually claim the island, and when they couldn't, they would steal the loot by basing 3 tiles above the island and claiming all the space. They would then stand right outside the contest zone, and when the other team claimed the island, they would rush in and steal all the loot. Once they claimed all this loot, they would stay on the island for as long as they could and then launchpad into either the 5th or 6th zone. Once they got into the zone, they were guaranteed to pull either the 6th or 7th zone because they would land in where they knew the zone was because of the forecast that they got earlier in the game. For the next strat, I want to break down one fight from game 8 because Flixie and Vico both play this fight almost perfectly. Starting with Flixie, he is pressuring a player and he sees his opponent edit out of the back of the box. He responds to this by placing the enemy's high wall and editing it and placing a ramp. This catches the enemy on this tile, and Flixie edits the ramp to the side to give himself a free shot. Unfortunately, he misses this shot, but he then reacts by getting the sidewall from a pretty hard cross replacement. He then hears the enemy shoot his gun, which allows Flixie to peek very aggressively into his window because he doesn't need to worry about return fire. After this, Flixie tries to predict a drop down from his opponent, but he doesn't move, so he quickly cleans up the fight by jumping in with the already large HP advantage that he has. While all this was happening, Vico was putting on his own masterclass. Vico is getting pressured and sees that his enemy is missing the cone on top of him and his back wall. He pounces on this opportunity and runs under his opponent, side jumps, and then places a cone, wall, and catches himself on a floor. The speed he does this at catches his enemy off guard and gives Vico a free kill. From here, they are now in a 3v1 and can quickly collapse onto the final player. When using Fizz in the endgame, many teams have started to build on top of themselves in order to bump their heads while they Fizz. The main reason why they do this is because players have gotten really good at tracking players who are jumping through the air, as once you're on the Fizz, your movement pattern becomes relatively predictable and slow. This leaves you susceptible to getting chased down and killed. By instead bumping your head on the tile above you, you still get a speed boost, but your movement is a lot less predictable and you are vulnerable for less time. Vico, Flixie, and Chap did this whenever they were in the mid ground, and they also made sure to stick as close to each other as possible to not allow themselves to get picked off as a solo. In trios, one of the most important aspects to surviving deep into the endgame is finding refreshes. The number one way to find refreshes is to use the triple spray. Vico, Flixie, and Chap would look for teams in wood and then look to spray them. With 3 people spraying, it was almost guaranteed they would get a kill or at least a lot of damage. In Game 7, they see a team standing on a wood floor right near them. They quickly build a box under this floor and spray it out, giving them an easy refresh that they would use to take height and win the game with. Vico, Flixie, and Chap in the most games took height in the 8th zone. They could do this because with their forecast, they knew exactly where the 9th zone was going to pull, and so they could position there and hold it off from any other team. When they couldn't get it on the 8th zone, they would keep trying throughout the rest of the endgame. In Game 7, they couldn't get it early on, so at the end of the 9th zone, they stopped fighting anyone in the lobby and start to elevate themselves. Once the 10th zone pulls, they instantly get to the front side and start to look back at height. This play doesn't work, but they applied good pressure. They then keep trying, and when they then go back the second time, they get a knock and are able to take height. This shows how important it is to keep pressuring the high ground even if you don't get it the first time, because each time you pressure the high ground, you weaken them for later. Once on the high ground, they have some great strategies to maintain it. The first is that they often play a very wide tarp across the high ground. This makes it harder for them to get shot out, and it also makes the high ground harder to take because there's less space for teams to jump up to them. They also will tarp very high off the ground because they don't have to worry about fall damage because they have dashes from earlier in the game. This means that if they get shot out, they can simply dash and survive any fall damage. Finally, while on the high ground, they are masters at applying pressure to the teams below them. They will often send one player down to fight or spray on the walls with the second high ground and have the other 2 players spray from above. This puts pressure onto the second height from multiple angles, forcing them to drop and keeping their high ground safe. For the final strategy, I want to go over some of the things that Vico, Flixie, and Chap got punished for in trios that they normally wouldn't in duos. The first thing is in Game 1, Chap drops down onto team's walls from the high ground but doesn't block his sides, and so he dies to a different team. You noticed an instant change in how they approach the endgame after this, as in the next game, Vico gets hit hard and he uses a ton of materials to keep himself safe. In trio, there are a lot more open eyes looking for plays, so you need to use the extra materials you have to make sure you don't die. The next is that you need to be really careful when you are in wood. With the ability to triple spray, you can be killed in the blink of an eye, so it's really important to be aware of your surroundings when in wood, especially in the endgame. These were 10 strategies that Vico, Flixie, and Chap used to be the best trio in the world. If you enjoyed this video, then you will definitely also enjoy this video where I explain why Pink and Vico fizz backwards. Make sure to like and subscribe. Peace.